First of all, I apologize because I totally could have finished this analysis all in one video. I really thought part 2 was going to be even longer than part 1, but once I mapped out part 2, I realized I could capture these thoughts a lot quicker than I expected. And if you haven't seen part 1, where I explain the wife's infidelity, the wife's death, the wife's story about the lamprey and the teenage girl, and many more things, I've included a link below in the description. Still though, I'm super excited to share these ideas around the rest of the film and its conclusion, so let's get into it. Starting with theme number 2, growth by vulnerability. We'll discuss Yusuke not starring in his own play, Yusuke and Masaki's relationship, and why Koshi is starring as Uncle Vanya. And in theme number 3, resolution of tragedy, we'll discuss Yusuke's denial, the car's symbolism, Koshi's breakdown in the car, Masaki's mother, the climax scene in the snow, and the ending of the movie, and much more. And if you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment, it helps so much. And if you want to see more of these, please make sure to subscribe as well. Let's get started. Theme number 2, growth by vulnerability. One thing that Yusuke absolutely refuses to do, no matter what, is star in his own play. When we see earlier him attempting to star in his own play, we see that the emotions are too overbearing for him. Every time he walks off stage, he struggles to recollect himself and hold together his real feelings. The reason why is because he identifies too closely with the main character he's playing, Uncle Vanya. Yusuke and the main character of his play share so much of the same pain and live regretfully. However, directing the play is much more bearable for Yusuke. Directing the play and reciting the play in his car gives him just enough distance where he's not reliving his tragedy, but able to reflect on his tragedy. He's looking at his life from the outside in, and only moving in to reflect when he's alone. But in order for Yusuke to grow as a person, develop new relationships, and move forward in life, Yusuke has to open up to someone. So, very poetically, Yusuke is assigned a driver who he is forced to use by the producers of his play. The assignment of a driver forces Yusuke to share his most vulnerable moments in his car with someone else. And very fortunately, Yusuke's driver, Masaki, is the perfect person for him to share these moments with. Both Yusuke and Masaki share the everlasting pain of unresolved tragedy with a loved one. Tragedy has made them both very inexpressive people, but spending so much time together in such an intimate setting eventually forces both of them to slowly warm up to each other, especially when they both recognize that they share so much of the same pain and haunting feelings of regret. And they both eventually share with each other what brought them to this city and the tragedy that preluded their escape here. And in one of my favorite scenes at the dinner table, Yusuke develops the courage to celebrate Masaki's excellence as a driver. But this praise and acceptance of praise happens in the most awkward way. Neither of them look at each other the entire moment, but you can tell deep down that it's a huge step forward for both of them in opening up. Masaki is a 23-year-old, and Yusuke's daughter would have been 23 had she still been alive. For me, this poetically indicates how Masaki, figuratively, carries the spirit of a daughter figure for Yusuke, where he can address his feelings and regrets, as if he had just one more moment to speak to his daughter. Yusuke chooses Koshi to star in his play as Uncle Vanya because he recognizes that Koshi is bearing some kind of pain. Koshi has a history of violence, along with a series of other crimes that have severely damaged his career. There's anger, fear, and sadness behind Koshi's eyes that Yusuke senses, which Yusuke knows is integral to playing the Vanya character. And it becomes completely clear that Koshi is bearing such pain when he breaks down in tears while giving advice to Yusuke. And we'll return to this scene and Koshi's words of advice in theme number 3, resolution of tragedy. As mentioned in the previous video, the Uncle Vanya play relates to Yusuke's darkest personal thoughts and feelings. He recites lines like, "Nobody knows how I feel. I can't sleep at night from frustration and anger. I've wasted my time." And the character of Uncle Vanya is known for blaming his environment for his shortcomings and failing to be honest with himself, never taking accountability. This is why we get the line from a different character to Vanya. "You speak as if your former convictions were somehow to blame, but your convictions were not at fault. You are the one at fault." Just like Vanya, Yusuke needs to learn to be honest with himself and take accountability in order for him to overcome his sadness, frustration, and regret. The car itself is a symbol of failing to progress and move on. He drives this old model he has had for several years as he is attached to it, never wanting to move on to another model and keeping his greatest secrets within this vehicle as long as he lives. And it's Yusuke's conversation with Koshi in the car that gives him a reality check about looking in the mirror about his current and past problems. When talking about Oto, Yusuke says, "She contained within her a spot that I couldn't look into, where something dark swirled. What I feared most was losing her. If she found out I knew, we wouldn't be able to maintain our balance." Then Koshi says, "Isn't it possible that she wanted you to hear her out?" And Koshi goes on to say, "If you really want to look at someone, then your only option is to look at yourself, squarely and deeply." And it's this idea of a dark spot, a blind spot, that ties in with Yusuke's literal blind spot from his glaucoma. By letting Masaki into his vehicle and into his mind, she could cover for his blind spot, literally and figuratively. In contrast, Yusuke never wanted to cover for his wife's blind spot that he calls her dark swirl, and as a result, the fate of their relationship was tragic. This is why we get the particular line that we see come from Oto's lips that haunts Yusuke when he hears it in his car. Of course, I'm sure that the truth, no matter what it is, isn't that frightening. What is most frightening is not knowing it. This line and scene confirms the idea of Yusuke's denial and his fear of the truth. Both Yusuke and Masaki come from tragedy with family members who have done harmful things to them. However, both of these family members were suffering. Masaki's mother suffered from mental illness, including multiple personality disorder, and Yusuke's wife suffered from depression and loneliness. Their suffering resulted in abusive, neglectful, and deceitful behavior towards Masaki and Yusuke. And Masaki will never know if her mother's second personality that was kinder, softer, and warmer was truly her who loved her daughter. And Yusuke will never know whether Oto truly still loved him romantically. However, at this point, there is no way of going back to fix either of these issues. There is no resolution of tragedy. You simply have to make peace with your unanswered past and make the most of your unpredictable future. And this is exactly what we see Yusuke and Masaki realize in this climax scene. They've finally figured out how to move on and how to be open to the light of the future. And this whole concept, concluding the story, leads perfectly into the two very final scenes. Themes of closure, continuance, and optimism are driven further in Leona's closing monologue, as we see Yusuke has gained the courage to star in his play as Uncle Vanya. He's come to terms with his reality, able to compose himself under the weight of the emotions that come with the role. And in the very final scene, we see that Yusuke is able to let go of his car completely, along with this stagnation and sadness and painful solitude. Instead of driving aimlessly to the sound of the same regretful recordings, the car is passed on to Masaki, someone who can now carve out their own path with purpose, direction, openness, and new loving relationships. Alright, that's my analysis. Subscribe for weekly videos and please send me recommendations. And please let me know your thoughts around Drive My Car. It's a super fascinating and ambitious movie, so I would love to hear what you think. I hope to see you again and thank you so much for watching. See you later.